So let's go ahead and get started. Hello again, I'm Dan Gay. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of BlockCerts Blockchain, and I'm the moderator for today's discussion. We have Tim Basco, who is our Chief Executive Officer, founder of BlockCerts Blockchain, and our Chief Architect. And
hey, everybody.
Yeah. Good to see you here this morning.
Thanks for everybody coming and being part of this.
Absolutely. So, this series, it continues to grow throughout the world. And I looked this morning, and we still have quite a few people registering, but we actually have people that are representative from 5 continents, from Canada to India, and from the US to Mauritius, Switzerland, Italy, Great Britain, and others. And thanks to all those of you that continue to join these very enlightening and thought-leading discussions. And before we start, I'd just like to say again, our heartfelt wishes go out to those that are affected in this crisis. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But our world from here really is focused on the changes that are taking place in our society, both personally and also with business, and how that is collapsing time in terms of technology and what we're seeing happen across the globe. And we continue to assemble business leaders for each of these weeks that we have these panel discussions to show what's actually happening across the world. And it's quite phenomenal week to week to see just the amount of change that is happening. And with that, as I said, we've got a packed agenda, a lot of great guests here and panelists. And to get started, Tim Basco is our CEO of BlockCerts Blockchain, and he'll be leading the presentation. Hans Peter Geer is the CEO of TrustWise, and he'll be talking about what they're doing in terms of immune pass, and just a fascinating thing that I can't wait to hear more about. David Goncalves is the founding partner of Vine Group in Toronto, and we'll lead a discussion in the finance world and mortgage and what's happening with that area and blockchain, and another fascinating discussion. And then also Daniele Minci, who's the president of Fusion SDX, which again, many changes in the financial world, and we look forward to hearing from Daniele. And then Dr. Zaid Muhammad Ali, with the president of eHealth Global, coming to us from Vancouver. So people represented all over the globe here. So with that, Tim, I'll go ahead and turn over the discussion and let you get started, because I know we've got a lot to cover here today.
Great. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, everybody, from joining us from all over the world. We're pretty excited to be here. Not a place we would have chosen to be, but let's talk about the world from here and a little bit about that. Thank you to all the panelists for joining us today as well. It's really, really great to have all of your support and thought leadership here. We're going to start out with looking at the economics and headlines today. The headlines being what's happening in the world as far as small businesses, jobs, and so forth. And obviously what we'd like to do is look at what's happening on the street with the people that are most affected, the people out of work. There's a lot of people suffering not only from a health perspective, but also from a financial perspective. So as we know, small businesses have a huge impact on job creation, more than large corporations. And that's been the case forever. However, in the United States and many countries, even with these bailouts, we're seeing that the small business relief funds are drained fast, and many companies are shut out. This was a headline as of April 16th, 2020. When we look at that, and I believe I'm going to be able to show you a quick video here of Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, talking a little bit about what's happening in the Seattle area and around the globe, and what his opinion is on the devastating effect to small business. So let's just look at that quickly and see what's being said there.
$349 billion is gone. What next can we do if Congress isn't going to appropriate more money to help men and women get the money they need just to get through the crisis? Howard?
Well, thank you for having me. And I think, as you did so well, the headline today is the SBA and PPP is out of money. And I think, let me just walk you through what we have been doing in Seattle over the last few weeks and why I think this is so central to the issue facing most Americans today. In Seattle, the engine of the economy, the politicians are so well to speak about that consistently, is small business, the engine of the economy. However, small businesses and restaurants in America are now facing significant challenges. In Seattle alone, 3,000 restaurants are closed, 100,000 hardworking people, to no fault of their own, are out of work. So over the last few weeks, our Family Foundation and many people in Seattle have helped us raise almost $7 million. And with that, we've got $500 of cash in the hands of every person who applied to the loan. I'm sorry, not a loan, but cash. And we got $500 in their hands as a bridge. The interesting thing and the challenge here, most of the people we've talked to still haven't gotten any financial assistance from the government. Now, the bigger issue today is, as I talk to these restaurant owners and small business owners, yes, PPP was designed to do a good thing, but for those people who even got it, but most of them didn't, that is just a Band-Aid for 2 months. The question really is, how do these restaurants and small businesses reopen?
So that's really the question, isn't it? It's how are we going to get back out of this? And our subject today is the exit strategy. Our subject today is looking forward. I think what's really interesting there is you heard that what happened was a private corporation, Starbucks, in their hometown, raised $7 million and took action. And we're here today with thought leaders around the world to try and encourage everybody that action is going to be taken by us, not the governments, not the politics that are going to get us there, but how do we take action affirmatively and get through this crisis? And more importantly, what happens after the crisis? That's what we're looking at. So when we look at this, let's just start out with a couple of the highlights of what we'll be talking about. Our health profile. Today, and I think Peter will talk more about this, but the risk of getting sick from COVID-19 may lie in your genes. When we get to the section on what we're going to talk about with COVID-19 and some of the progressive thought work that's being done there, we'll look at more about what happens with this and maybe other future illnesses, future issues, so that we don't end up right back where we started with a pandemic and a closed world. Resilient health systems, we'll ask Dr. Muhammad Ali about what is it that he sees in the future for the health systems, the actual systemic issues that are facing crises such as the emergency MASH type units being set up in Central Park in New York. What we're doing as we go through this crisis is we're learning a tremendous amount about our society, about our world, about how we deal with issues and problems. We're learning about global politics and how the world either comes together or doesn't come together. And we're learning about what it means and what it will mean for international economics, travel, trade, trust, and transactions. That's just a huge, huge, enormous impact. And one of the things that's so unique about this pandemic situation that we're in right now, the quarantining, is we're learning about everything that affects our environment. And so today, what we hope to do is look at that exit strategy and say, well, how are we going to kickstart this back out? And what's it going to look like? it's unlikely that it'll look like a rocket ship. It more likely will look like a slow progressive step back into what the new normal is. The exit strategy as the world emerges, it will be incredibly important that we as countries, and if not through our politicians, but through our own actions, come together and share and work together more collaboratively, more digitally than ever before. Because if there's one thing we can all say is nobody is untouched by this. So what we hope to do today is look at some massive industries, the finance and banking industry, which David and Daniele will speak to, and how are these massive impacts gonna be there? In 2008, we saw a meltdown of the mortgage market. We're fortunate today to have an expert in that industry, and we saw that these issues back then were global. This issue is even more global, and it affects everything than back then. So how will we be resilient? How will the global resilience to COVID-19 be achieved? And what will we be able to do for these people who are putting their lives on the line when we start looking at how critical they are, and how maybe before we didn't really we took for granted what they actually did in these critical industries that we're now benefiting from and still able to carry on some semblance of life here. So I think what I'm trying to point out is these are all headlines. This is not me or coming up with these ideas. Every one of these slides is a headline, and you can follow this story. This is our story. This is the global story about what we're doing and how we're becoming different in this. And that difference is going to affect everything. It's going to affect our economy. It's going to affect our financial system, our health system, our international economic system. We can look at things like coming out from PricewaterhouseCoopers, how retail banks can keep the lights on during the COVID-19 crisis and recalibrate for the future. I think one of the most interesting parts about this, and I've read this over and over again across the subject matter that's being touched, is the rapid pace at which digital adoption and digital impact, resiliency, if you will, is going to be adopted. We have these big behemoth corporations, banks being one of the most largest offenders of this. For years, we've been talking about how banks are earning billions and billions of dollars. I think the last stat I read was over $7 billion just in late fees and financial transaction fees. One banker several years ago actually said, the definition of today's banker is how to teach people to mismanage their money. And the reason that's relevant is because they make so much money on these fees and these transactions. And now all of a sudden, one of my favorite memes that came out in the travel industry was it shows $150, you're 1 kilogram over for your luggage, and the meme underneath it was remember us. And so we see these were business models that had been established in a centralized economy in a way that we were basically conditioned to accept and understand as the norm, and those are gone now. So how will we see this recalibration happen? And finally, if any of you have kids, I have 5. 2 are professors, 3 are still at home, and my kids really remind me, both from my kids and daughter-in-law at Columbia University who are teaching online down to the kids at home, we know that education is a huge difference. So we're going to talk just a little bit and touch on how will education be done and what will we see in the future for education with our children who are here at home. Excuse me. And again, the World Economic Forum, everybody is looking at this like, what does this actually mean? And I think when you look at the pictures of the this one that we have in front of us, look at the hands and look at that. That's a parent, that's a couple of kids, and we're more involved than ever in our children's future and our education. Finally, one of the most interesting areas that we saw was this idea of the coronavirus and what it means for climate change. We've ignored it. We've had debates. Is it real? Isn't it? And I think the world is starting to look at, yeah, very real. And one scientist said, given all of these other things and people suffering and the things that we don't want happening, this is perhaps one of the largest experiments in what would happen if we actually paid attention to the environment and what does it actually look like when we're cleaning up our act as inhabitants of this planet. So, you know, it was fascinating to me as going through this, like, what does our exit strategy look like, to find out that actually seismic activity has changed. We're not pounding the pavement anymore, literally pounding the pavement. We're moving differently, and as a result, the earth is moving differently. So what does that mean as we exit out of this? What can we take away from this, and will it help us? So our subject matter today is on the idea of modernizing our way of thinking and our lives. That's what we're doing right here. We're not having a panel in a large conference. We're having a panel with people from all over the world that didn't fly anywhere. Maybe they flew from their kitchen and grabbing a cup of coffee, or if it's evening, from a glass of wine to their wherever you guys are in your homes. Maybe they walked, took a walk outside and came back in for this, but they didn't fly anywhere. There was no pollution generated in getting this panelist group together. Does that mean we won't ever socialize again? No, but it does mean we can modernize our thinking and we can see what it's like to get together digitally. Decentralized, we're all in different places. We're doing fine. We're centralized while we're decentralized, and we're bringing this broadcast to you. And obviously, we're digitized. We're using some amazing technology. And in defense of Zoom, I'm sorry, I'd like to say this. A company that can go from 2 million concurrent hits to 200 million concurrent users on a platform without any warning, they got Zoom bombed. Great. But it is completely unfair to say it's not a safe protocol, it's not a safe platform. I'm in the technology business, and that is an amazing achievement. In fact, it's an amazing achievement that we're even able to keep up with all of this additional load. Imagine if that load were on a highway in one of these cities physically. Imagine what that would look like. And what we did is we kept everything flowing with a couple of traffic accidents. You don't shut down or say, we're not going to allow traffic to happen anymore because you have some accidents, or because you need to put in a red light every now and then. So when it comes to hackers, we need to put in red lights and say stop, but we don't need to demonize a company that's done a hell of a job, excuse me, but they have, from a perspective of bringing us all together and allowing us to digitize and keep things moving. So hats off to you guys, Zoom out there, wherever you are. And really, I think that brings us to the point of core values. What are our core values? You know, we've got lots of time to think about this now, some of us. If you're in the digital world like we are, we're working 15, 18 hours a day. It's really hard, but it makes us come back and say, what are those core values that we care about and how can we carry that forward into our exit strategy. So today, I hope that our speakers and our panelists can give us some insight in what they think we can do to help sustain the positives coming out of this from a core value standpoint. Okay. So to start with, I'd like to ask David to speak a little bit about finance, the finance and banking sector. The new frontier for mortgage lenders and services in March, it says beyond business continuity, lenders and servicers must grapple with evolving regulatory requirements. Of course, that's going to be a huge issue. The risk of downstream regulatory and litigation scrutiny for actions taken today and management of reputational risk. They're looking at the idea that this concept of regulations, of change, of going to digital and handling what is actually the largest lending industry on the planet. Just in North America, we have $17.6 trillion out in traditional mortgage banking. So what I'd like to ask David is to use his experience, his thought leadership. David is the founding partner of Vine Group, one of the largest and fastest growing mortgage banking organizations in Canada, and is really intimate with the knowledge of what it's going to take to do a transformation in this industry and what it actually means for mortgage. So David, thank you for joining us and agreeing to share some thoughts on finance, banking, and in particular, this massive industry that we all depend on.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I think when it comes to like lending, the core value is always trust, and that's the thing that everybody has to come to grips with, is how do you trust a digital interaction and a digital transaction to be on both sides of the equation, right? On the lender side and on the consumer side. So I think what we're going to have to see is the evolution of digital lending on platforms that are going to be very secure. So banks' number one goal is going to be security. The second biggest objective for them will be efficiency, because that's one of the biggest disadvantages they have right now. Is the industry right now is extremely inefficient. So I think what you'll find is, and then the last thing that banks will be focusing on is how to create a real positive client experience. Because to be frank with you, I think the client experience right now in a typical transaction is quite poor. The amount of touches that they get, the amount of information and how information is being shared relatively in very poorly secured manners right now. And I think the clients don't know any better, so they're accepting it. But I think this is what the banks are going to want to change in near future. So with regards to the first objective for security, right? The main objective is going to be fraud. Fraud is still a big problem, and the reason why in our lending environment they still want us to meet everybody in person is to do that one very simple thing: see the person, meet the person, verify their ID. That's really the only reason people meet. If we can start demonstrating that we can authenticate a person on a digital platform, and you probably can actually do a better job because you can do real background checks through a digital platform, then that risk can be mitigated and that service can all be improved through a digital platform, right?
So you see that like digitization of the identity as being one of the primary drivers behind what's been blocking digitization of this industry?
Oh yes, for sure. I think right now is the impression is that you can't really identify and authenticate an ID through a digital communication, right? So that has to be a shift there in order for banks to really get on board. And then it's obviously the second part of security is documentation, is authentication of documentation. And right now we're relying on people emailing documents or doing a Dropbox. And we have the technology already to go direct to source.
Right.
So by doing it digitally and having that digital conversation with the client, having the clients on a secure channel where they can give us access direct to source, we could eliminate the possibility of fraudulent documents, and the authentication of documents can be done a lot better digitally than they are done right now, which is supposed to be in person through fax copies or through emails, right? And so I think the bank needs to get their heads around that security feature to really start feeling comfortable with it and building that, you know what, this transaction, there's that trust between them and the customer.
Right. And when we look at that documentation and so forth by email, PDF, things that are easily manipulated out there, there's really no, I think it's been a false sense of security anyway. So it's interesting that you say that and you bring that up, because a big part of this is how do we make that transaction flow seamlessly so there's complete transparency and authentication throughout that.
One of the big problems right now with documentation and fraud is when you look at fraud numbers, they only know what they caught. And I think the industry really believes that there's a lot more of it happening than we all care to truly admit to it. Because
Right.
it's, like you said, documentation is manipulated. It's done so well that you can't detect it.
Exactly.
And that's why authenticating digitally direct to source would eliminate that whole issue there.
Right. And one of the things that I found interesting as I was going through this is, is this headline here where it says in the $1.6 trillion market, Canadians don't even understand the basics. So do you believe like digitization and bringing this is far better off for the both sides of the transaction? On the one hand, we have the institutional risk of fraud and we can eliminate that. On the other hand, we can really make this more of a world where people are better informed, better educated, and more capable of being involved in probably what will be the biggest purchase of and commitment of their lives.
Yeah, I think by digitizing it and allowing a much better and more direct communication with the customer through a digital platform, we can definitely make this experience not only better for the customer, but also a lot more efficient for the lender. So right now, lenders fund about 50% of their applications. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that deals are falling apart because the communication is so poor right now between the lender and the customer that by the end of the transaction, they find out the deal doesn't work. Well, by digitizing and by collecting documents up front, we could eliminate that and make it a lot more efficient. Once we make that more efficient for the customer, they're going to be able to they're going to get better solutions that are more specific to their needs, and they're also going to get better pricing. So they're able to share in some of these low interest rates and these better margins will be shared with the customer as the lenders try to capture market share. So it's definitely a great thing for clients.
And that's a huge thing when you're talking about this size of a market. The other thing I noticed was on this graph in Canada, and I'm not sure how this shakes out in the United States, but 75% of the market share lies with these kind of centralized lenders. Do you think that digitizing will allow other participants to come in, create a more competitive environment, maybe add more efficiency through competition to this market in the future?
For sure, I definitely believe so. I think the more digital we get, the more competitive the market will be. So it'll definitely be more customer friendly. So I would expect that, the banks will always have a large percentage of market share because they're basically funding the mortgages even for other institutions, right, behind the scenes. So that's never going to really change. But that service level and that product innovation, that can change immensely by having more options through a digital market that could be globalized.
Well, that's exactly, one of the things I think we can take away from this is we're now looking, and the reason we wanted to pick on this market is, again, it's the largest borrowing market in the world. So I believe that when we look at this, it'll filter down to other areas in people's lives, other borrowing mechanisms. If we start here with this behemoth industry, do you think you'll see kind of similar transitions across that finance and banking sector?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So what I think what you'll start seeing is if we start getting mortgage financing into a more digital format, you'll see the automation of all lending. because especially when a client is doing that mortgage financing, if you would, they're creating a footprint with that lender now, right? With that and with that digital service, we can then take that footprint, and we can basically open it up to other lenders. And what you'll find is clients will be getting qualified in advance, and they'll be building a separate credit rating, if you would, internally with lenders, because lenders do monitor their clients internally, and that will be able to open up other lending instantly. So the best example would be apply for your mortgage and get your car loans restructured, get your credit card restructured with better services and options that line up with your needs. Everything could be happening simultaneously at once with that one application. Right now, doing things in separate silos is just simply because, again, human interaction is really what slows down the whole process.
And maybe we could even take that one step further to what we saw at the beginning of this presentation, which is freeing up capital. A lot of people, I know I've done this, is borrow against my house, borrow against my personal assets to get a business going, to, you know, create jobs that we do as small business people. So again, your point's well taken. That just starts expanding the possibility of creating a new kind of economic model, I think.
Yeah, with a proper process in place, with proper artificial intelligence that is really designed to help customers understand the financial industry and how to access it and use it to their benefit, I think would changes the whole format. So what I think will happen is as we become more digitized, you're going to see customers being giving advice that's not just specific to one transaction, but cross pollinates with their, like you said, their businesses, their investment opportunities, and so forth.
Or even education for their kids, right?
Exactly. It's all about, you know, the generational thinking, estate planning, succession planning. All that starts with it could start with that credit application right off the hop.
Exactly. Even something like life insurance, where I want to cover the debt of my mortgage with spouses and things like that.
Yeah, and in North America, especially in Canada, we're that's kind of like an optional thing. But a lot of the world, insurance is a mandatory thing.
Right.
And one of the flaws with it being mandatory is you may not necessarily be getting the best product or value out of it, right? But by opening this to a digital format, allows us to source multiple providers simultaneously and give a customer something that really lines up with their needs. So yeah, I think this is it's definitely the way to go with regards to increasing customer experience and taking a small margin business that is very high volume and improving the margins, which ultimately will translate to customer savings and better products.
And just a thought, and this just kind of popped into my head as you were talking, but assuming that, you know, we were able to give a profile of a customer, and even if insurance is optional, if I have insurance as a life insurance policy, then don't I effectively become a lower risk and therefore qualify for a bit better margin than somebody who, say, passes away, doesn't have insurance, and this mortgage goes into default? So it does kind of create a more of a stable and more predictable ecosystem for everybody, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Exactly. You hit it right in the head, right? Because we're able to bring in multiple partners in different services, we can definitely all at once be able to identify opportunities to make it more cost effective. And then banks need to get their heads around the fact that, hey, if we're reducing risk, then they ultimately will want to compete for that business, right? And again, will benefit from it, right?
Right.
You know, decentralizing it all into one channel, into a digital channel, is what's going to make it real simple for the customer, and let them to carry that digital wallet, if you would, of their financial history around with them, and it'll make it so much easier in where they'll be able to do transactions and apply for credit and access credit with a very just a quick flick of a switch, versus having to go through this massive process all over again and starting from the beginning every time they apply for something.
What's interesting there is that by integrating your entire platform into the one wallet, for example, so including your healthcare areas, might make insurance very different in how we evaluate the insurance that we get. So that obviously, if we can now bring in our healthcare digital wallet and integrate it with the financial one, the offerings that come out through insurance companies, you know, instead of having to go through multiple, you know, tests, etc., you have a full history available that can be integrated into that insurance purchase and/or your risk assessment on any financial instrument.
Yeah, that's bang on right there. It's really about just creating a one-stop shop that allows customers to simplify their whole process in a very secure manner. So security is always going to be the big key right now. As long as we can figure out security and technology, and I know, Tim, that's kind of your specialty there. That's as long as banks can understand that security and financial institutions as a whole, I think that digital wallets will become the new norm.
And customers as well, so they can be assured that their privacy, they're in control of those records, not some centralized authority that or a hacker. Daniele, excuse me, Daniele, maybe you can speak to the idea of the digital assets market and how that might affect this this transformation.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a very interesting period of time. If you look at what's going on in the US with the digital bill, digital dollar and the dollar bill, I think we have an unprecedented opportunity to create mass adoption for digital wallet now, not waiting months, not waiting years. Because if you think about how the government in the US will deliver this type of help, so the $1,200 per person above 16 years old age, it's something that raises concern because this can't go through the banking system, because the banking system has implemented their own rules, and out of which 20% in the US are being excluded. And that's number two. If you want to deliver the help right now in a matter of minutes, it doesn't work, because the banking system will take weeks or even months until the type of help will be delivered to the end person. So definitely we need to have a solution now, and speed really matters. That's why the adoption of a digital wallet, for me, for us, it's a key successful factor to be embraced right now to deliver at scale and with speed this stimulus package all over the world, starting from the US, could be Canada, but speed right now really matters. And number two, right now, people expect to have the evidence that technology works before they adopt it. We are in a period of time while we're working with absence of evidence, which is somehow misunderstood by people. We don't have an evidence that this can work for 100% of the people. So, but we have to take the risk right now in the absence of evidence that if we don't take action in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months time, we'll be in an even worse situation. So that's why we need to take action. We need to do it now.
Thank you, Daniele. So I think what we're seeing and what we're hearing is this idea of identity, security, privacy. Thank you very much, David, and everybody for your insight, your thought, leadership on that, and kind of guiding us as to what a digital market is going to look like, and a digital market that's going to impact really the majority of the people around the world in their financial lives. And as Zaid brought out, this idea of global health identity ties right into that. So when we look at that, we look at what will medical look like in the future. Where are we really going to get our medical, and how is that going to start? What's the certainty that we'll have in our health, and how do we know that on one end it's a doctor, and on the other end that's the patient that's being treated? That's an issue of identity and clarity and trust in that relationship, which is so critical in the health industry as it is in finance. So to start with, on that conversation, I'd like to talk about what Hans-Peter has with this idea of the immunity certificate, the checking of immunity, and how that digital identity builds into the who we are as people, and what this fascinating project that he started with his team on immunity certificates and what it means. So Hans, can you jump in and maybe explain a little bit about the ImmuPass and what your thoughts are here with how we start with the situation we're faced with and bring that into the future?
Thank you very much, Tim, for having me here, also on the panel. We created this idea approximately 3.5 weeks ago, when basically everything was shutting down. And then the thoughts were, how do we speed up the economic recovery finally, if we now shut down all the things, have social distancing, putting people in quarantine. And then the idea was that slowly antibody tests were on the verge. They were not really, it was not really clear whether they were already safe enough to do proper antibody tests. And the idea was, okay, if we have this antibody test and until we have herd immunity, it will take quite some time, and also the risk of being affected are maybe too high to say I deliberately try to get COVID-19. And then we have to wait for the vaccination. So it will take some time how this until we get back to normal. And the question was, can we somehow improve this and speed this up by coming up with a immunity certificate? What we know in the meantime, at least in Germany from some hotspots, that something between 15 or 20% of the population is already immune. And these people could work rather normally. Okay, we are aware that immune doesn't mean non-contagiousness, but on the other hand, I think the residual risks we can live with, we have to accept, and we can even mitigate them or reduce them further. So then the question was, okay, how do we do this? What's very clear is if we issue such a certificate, first of all, we have the variant that we do it on paper. The likelihood, if there is any kind of advantage with it, that you might be able to travel or to gather in bigger groups, it will be highly likely that these certificates will be forged. So we need a way to ensure that they are not forged properly. And with paper certificates, you also have the issue that you don't have any statistical data. So here then the idea came in, the alternative is a database, but the database, we have here health data in, personal information. It's not really, it's a pretty nice also target for hackers. How do we organize also cross-border access to such a database? We are here in Switzerland. I'm in the mountains, very close to Italy. Basically, we have a lot of Italian people here. So how do we prove that these people or some of these people might be immune? And when we do business with them or meet in a restaurant, how do we prove that they are immune? So, and that was the start of the idea. The way we thought about it is that we have a kind of a certification process. First of all, that we create a digital identity, a self-sovereign digital identity, which consists basically of a passport number and a digital randomly generated security code, which then creates the digital ID. Basically, everybody can do this by himself and has full control over his digital ID. On the other hand, we have to authorize the one who issue such immunity certificates. There might be also multiple certificates. So what we are, and then basically the thing is, we do the test, we register the test kit, and then basically store the certificate on the digital ID. So that's the the basic idea. And what you can then do with it, once you have this certificate, you can basically present it to someone. It's your own decision whether you like to do this or not. And you can create a bigger trust so that people that you are not can get infected, but also that you are most probably can't infect other people. And so that was the idea. And this, how could this help finally? It could help that you could avoid costly distancing rules. Now, basically, Germany issued a rule that even in cars, you have to have a distance of 1.50 meters, which means that at least you need a 4-seat car, and then you can only be seated diagonally. And this
so
is
we're all gonna have to drive 1-person sports cars or 4-seaters.
Yeah. So this is, or you go in a shop, you would like to buy some clothes or some shoes, and the shop assistant cannot come close to you and help you. You have to do everything by yourself. If you present the immunity certificate, basically you can refrain from these security measures. Another issue is, how do we get the airlines back to full productivity? If we have to keep these distances in the airlines, basically maybe only 1 seat in a row can be sold, at least at the beginning. And this doesn't really make sense. So we could add the people who are already immune, and this community is growing, basically seat them between people, even on at their discretion, between them. So I think there is a lot of cost reduction possibilities. Another reduction possibility is that now the governments are focusing very much on tracing, and tracing is also a very expensive process. And by, for instance, if you get notified that you have been in contact with an infected person, you could easily prove that basically also the investigators don't have to pursue this trace anymore. So
Right.
in our idea, there was basically, when we have this certificate, we can speed up the recovery because we can loosen the protection measures, and also basically working together normally. And this also gives us, on the personal side, if I meet you in person, finally, that I can sit with you and don't have to pay attention, that I always keep this distance. So it's also a very practical aspect in the life.
It strikes me that as you go through this, which is fascinating, and thank you for doing this work, because I think it's incredibly important. And it strikes me that when we look at things like passport, where we travel, things like that, these are all things that we can weave in to this digital identity now to further validate that this hasn't been a fraudulent passport, and therefore, you know, maybe somebody who is immune, their passport stolen to create this certificate. So the more of these factors and collaborations we can get, which is possible on the blockchain and through a proper structure of a digital identity wallet, even down to, yeah, I've got this mortgage with David, I've got this doctor in Canada, and I've got, you know, this actually is Tim, and it actually gives me more of a footprint of what my digital identity is. It adds further and further validity every moment to that certificate, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think this was the major issue, and of course, I think in Europe we are a little bit more sensitive on data protection than at least from what we hear from the United States. But if we have a sub-sovereign identity, this would give us a huge advantage actually also in the future for other businesses and the like. We have the political situation in Switzerland. We are talking to the authorities. We have support from PwC Switzerland, from one of the biggest electricity provider. We are gaining support every day now. The major issue is that the politicians are afraid of discrimination. And this is the major obstacle that they are a little bit reluctant. One other issue was this false positive certificates. But the major issue is the discrimination aspect. But in this respect, our view is that we have to stand it also for future maybe mutations of the viruses, and also for
yeah, this is what I was saying before about the absence of evidence, or the evidence of the absence. So people and politicians are the first trying to adopt the perfect solution before it's been implemented. Probably there's no perfect solution, but we need a solution right now to improve from the current situation where we are. And if we don't take action, we will never improve it. So to me, we are at the crossroad of a fundamental shift in how our society works, from top down, and as I believe, from the bottom up. While, so the local, so we are taking action because we believe in our community, these immunopaths, it works fine. And then little by little is going to be improved up to the airlines, up to the intercontinental traffic, whatever it is. But this is a call to action for us to step in and trying to do it. So you can do it in Switzerland. We can implement in the fintech, in the healthcare space. Then we connect because data are interoperable. We have cross framework and we can work together. And then we have created a brand new of doing things, new platforms without even tell that we have a need for a platform. That's what I believe we have to do.
And Zaid,
absolutely correct. The major point is also the politicians are trying to do this nationally, and there is a similar initiative in Germany right now. But honestly, if you want to use these certificates, we have to have a global certificate, which is also globally recognized. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. How do we travel finally without recognition of such certificates if they are not basically somehow standardized and globally accepted?
Exactly. And so Zaid, we've talked a lot about this idea of privacy and, you know, what you've always faced in the health industry. And I know you go to the hospital every week, so thank you for doing that, by the way. We really do appreciate you putting your life out there on the line, away from your family, and you're not in quarantine, you're out there helping people. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how we actually might see this in the applying the thoughts that have always been there for privacy and security in the health industry to this new world of a digital identity, a digital health identity, if you will, that's tied into all these other factors.
Sure enough. Thanks, Tim. You know, one thing I was going to bring up just before I answer that question is related to Immunipass, is that the one key area I think that, or the one important area I think that it places is in research. So when I say that, what I mean by that is that we still don't quite understand, we don't have enough data, and we don't have enough of a profile built around COVID-19 in terms of its strains, who it affects, who has natural immunity, can we get a secondary infection? There's a bunch of unanswered questions. And I feel like a platform such as the one that Hans has presented here is like the ideal platform to be able to deliver that information. So once we have people signed up in this platform and they present their data, we'll be able to start to track, you know, their location, the type of infection they've had, the type of symptoms they may have. You know, can they get reinfected? You know, are there endemic areas that have particularly more virulent strains than other areas that may not have the same? So how much of it is endogenous factors like that you carry forward, and how much of it is exogenous factors like the environment you go into, or even maybe the healthcare that is presented in that environment. These are some complex points, but they don't have to be so complicated, because once we start to have data that we can trust and that we can track and that we can follow and that we control as a patient, I think this gives us a fantastic, fabulous, really strong research tool that can be used by governments alike to try and be able to deliver the best care for its population. So that's one point that I think that we hadn't touched upon that is really critical, and that is understanding where we are at with the whole pathway with COVID-19, and therefore future infectious diseases, et cetera, as well. So that was the one point I wanted to make sure that we touched upon.
Great. That sounds like a fascinating analysis of the whole model. And then how do you see, when we're dealing with this, the idea of the personal health record, the idea of identifying and then de-identifying, if you will, so that basically we're looking at a QR code or a transaction hash, and maybe I know what the red mark, like getting denied on my credit card because it didn't go through, is, but the rest of the world is, because I think Hans brings up a good point. One of the big fears is this idea of discrimination, and certainly we don't need any more of that in the world. So how do you see maybe some of that evolving in as we exit?
So that's interesting, because I think some of the way around having that sort of, people being identified individually, ways around that, of course, are the fact that we can digitize that information and present it in a nondescript manner, so that we have a better understanding about contact tracing and stuff that doesn't necessarily identify an individual. But the important point, I think, that with regards to our health profiles, is that in healthcare, we're extremely sensitive about that healthcare data. That healthcare data has to be not only verified, but it has to be protected from society at large. So if I have, a certain health profile as a patient, I want to make sure that that health profile is, first of all, available to the healthcare worker, to my doctors and to other individuals, so that they can deliver the best care possible. But I don't necessarily want it out there for anyone to be able to hack into, or anyone to be able to use or abuse. So by going through a trusted platform where we can where the patient can release the information as needed to the right individuals, and that can be traced in an appropriate manner and tracked in an appropriate manner and verified in an appropriate manner, allows that security level that we have always looked for in the healthcare field. And in addition to that, you can also then take that to the next level, where when we start looking at contact tracing, things like that, and we can say, okay, globally in this area, we have individuals, but we're not going to identify the individuals. We're going to identify simply the area, or a QR code, or some sort of a nondescript identifier, to be able to help with contact tracing and help with control of healthcare issues, right? So there's multiple levels.
Similar like a double-blind study. You guys have been doing that for years.
Absolutely, which we've been,
right?
Exactly. Good analogy. Right. Absolutely, right. It is.
Great. Well, thank you so much for bringing that. So as we can start seeing, there's a lot of thoughts out there about how we become digital, and how we start addressing this, not in silos, but effectively in a format that crosses not only thought, but disciplines and everything that we do in our lives. And again, that perhaps is one of the most obvious parts about what we're faced with right now, which is this idea of everything. So we call that the digital business machine. And when we get into this digital business machine, this digital life machine, you start looking at all the things that are going on behind the scenes that are going to have to come together in some kind of a format. And really, if you look at the illustration here, this illustrates what you're hearing about how many things are being thought about by experts in their fields, by the people who are our feet on the street, as Daniel says, who are locked down and saying, look, we can't sustain a future like this, nor do we want to. We want to bring back the world in a way that it is effective, that we can, again, socialize. We can, I don't know about you guys, but some of the things I miss, my favorite restaurant. Yesterday, or actually early this morning, Daniele was on a chat with me, and one of our business associates said, won't it be great to go have a scotch and a cigar at a conference again, right? I mean, things like that we really do miss. We're social animals, and we love to be together. And, you know, certainly we're learning to appreciate these things. So when we start looking at the way the world's set up, and we have these big empty spaces now, just big empty spaces, and around those spaces is what we're doing. We're on screens. But that's not fully sustainable to where we want to be. Recently, we saw this happen with the G7 foreign ministers, and all of them meeting virtually. Great. I won't get into the conversation about what happened when everybody met virtually, but it's fascinating that we are now in this hybrid world of that digital business machine, that digital economic machine that is getting us into the world in a way that we are here today, as well as Hans was talking about, how do we actually get back out there and meet face to face? How do we actually get out there and share that personal relationship? So I believe that we're looking at this exit from the centralized world. I believe that when we see these kinds of things and what the international business machine was back in those days, over 100 years ago now, when IBM came out, it was fascinating to the world to go international. You know, this is an example of what it will look like when we go digital. The digital business world will be distributed. It will be different. It will be an exit that has the hybrid technology married with the physical world and the social world that we're used to. And frankly, that all of our structures, from the 3 across seats where you're crammed into an airline, and maybe too often you've gotten that middle seat on a long haul flight, which is never any fun. So maybe that's a good thing. To the conferences that might be organized a little better, or with a little less of a physical footprint, and we bring ourselves together in smaller environments. But I think that when I found this from 2010, and it says technology was so much kinder back then. Well, was it really? Like, really? It was more manageable. Today, we have to think out of the box, and we have to think out of the centralized box into a decentralized box, because this is what's happening. All over the world, conferences are canceled. The Olympics was canceled. And I don't know if that's ever happened before, where the Olympics, even during times of war, have continued. So to me, when we look at this, what I've called this is, for years, I've called it the open structure organization. And certainly I do think that we'll see ourselves streamed into conferences. This kind of technology actually does exist, where we can have physical presence without being physically present, even more so than we are here. And we'll have these containers of the kinds of things we need to do globally out there, yet we still have the freedom of being together physically. And I think when we start looking at that, we start looking at, well, what's the impact on the way work is going to happen, the way jobs are going to come back, the way that we're going to create new jobs and new flexibility. And I found this, which was fascinating. This is just a little less than a year ago, actually. And it says, well, 40% of dads have requested flexible working. 44% of these requests were unsuccessful, according to a research from Dad Life. Dad Life is and that sentence got cut off, that Dad Life is a UK magazine. I'm not sure how 44% of 40% works, but the point is that we were already moving to this idea of a more flexible world, a more flexible work environment. Employers have been built around this idea of centralization. Hospitals, we see that now, don't we, Zaid? Built around this idea of centralization. Mortgage banking, built around the idea of centralization. Show up, show your ID, things like that. And even markets, the stock markets, the financial markets, centralized. So how do we decentralize, and what's that likely to look at? You know, we're running short on time here, but looking at that, we're going to see things like this idea of extreme multitasking, untraditional hours, unpredictable work locations, and multiple elements that enter our lives now as we exit. And also, when we do have these kinds of requests for really good reasons, as I mentioned, we need to bring 1 in 10 workers have lost their jobs in the last 3 weeks. That was in the LA Times, 1 in 10. And that's increasing, that's not decreasing. So how will we bring people back to work? Where will we bring people back to work? And if they are at-risk populations or they don't have that certificate, Hans, that doesn't mean they can't contribute or be part of this while we're working on the solutions for the virus or other things, including solutions for how we manage our families. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a father of 5, and I always, I worked digitally and globally for 7 years. I always wanted my children to be around my children, but these pictures kind of stood out to me because I've been that guy in the upper, it's my right-hand corner, the last day before working away. I've been that father. I've been it 5 times. And I think that when we look at where we go from here, our children will learn with what we do now and how we do in the world from here. And so I'm even experiencing this in the lower right-hand side. That's my daughter and my youngest daughter. And you know, it's great to see and be part of their lives in this way. Also, it's great to be part of their lives as they go back to school and we get back on airplanes and go travel and do our work in our offices and so forth. So I think it's really important that we look at this foundation we're setting and we keep exploring how our exit strategy is going to evolve from here. What is our exit strategy? And what do we want to carry from this experience away with us into the world the next time that we bring this forward? And what is that really that we're building for our children as we prepare for the extra and for a new tomorrow? So what I want to do is just thank everybody and end with this. Let's not forget the heroes out there today. Let's not forget what the suffering is that's going on in the world. Let's not forget those who do go and risk their lives today that are in New York hospitals, in these dramatic places where they're actually doing things. Let's not forget those who are out there to save those people they didn't even know yesterday. They walked past on the street, perhaps, and they did that so those people can also see another sunrise. Let's really be appreciative of all of those people. And in the words of Christopher Reeve, A hero is an ordinary individual who finds strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles. He's a New Yorker. Most of you know Superman's story, and he was an inspiration during his life. I think we can take inspiration from this now. I'd like to thank everybody for being part of this. You're all an inspiration to me. Picking it up, Hans, 3 weeks ago, going for it, just saying, let's do a hackathon and let's figure this out. Every step, no matter how small it is, take it, be there, be a hero, and think about all those people out there that are doing this every single day. Every little thing we can do, is going to make this world a better place, make this exit more possible, more rapid, and we don't need to depend on the politicians, whether we're Starbucks and can raise $7 million, or we can get on and inspire somebody to do something. That's really what being a hero is about. So thank you. You guys are all heroes to me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be affiliated with you, associate with you, and I appreciate everybody who spends their time on these calls with us, because there's lots of other things you could be doing. Share the word, and let's get out there and make a difference in this world. We want an exit strategy, and let's make it a great one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, panelists. And again, this is Dan Gay. And if you have any questions, anyone, just send us an email at info@blockcerts.com. And we will also be getting the recording of this out to everyone. I've already taken down some quotes, and we'll get that out to everyone as well. For example, David, digitization of identity and documentation, and also digital wallets will become the norm. Awesome quote, and great leadership there. And I know in working with your company, we truly see that vision as well. And each of you, I will get out quotes from everyone, and Hans Peter immunity certificates will speed up our recovery, and Daniele, adoption of the digital wallet where speed matters. And I will get out information and some quotes out to everyone as well. So thank you very much for joining us. Again, if you have any questions, info@blockcerts.com, and we'll get information right back to you. Thank you very much.
And just to make a quick mention, every Friday following the webinars, we do answer those questions on our podcast. We've got a 30-minute podcast at the same time right now.
That's
on
correct.
Fridays. And so please join our podcast. We'll get that information out to everybody. And you can find it on our Telegram channel at BlockCerts. You can find it on Twitter and at Tim S. Vasco, and on our website. So thank you. And we will, we appreciate the questions. Sometimes we don't have time to get to them here. So we do make sure we follow up a week from today and every Friday on questions that are brought up.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay safe.